I'm sharing with you my top 3 beginner-friendly sewing books, so stay tuned! Hello and welcome. I'm Akram and you're watching Akram's Ideas, bringing creative and crazy ideas to life. So to kick off National Sewing Month, the September 2018, I thought I'd share with you my top 3 beginner-friendly sewing books. And so these are books, some of them include patterns, some of them are just reference books that help you learn the techniques for sewing. So some of them are really basic, and I found them to be really helpful when I started sewing. To see more episodes like this, be sure to click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to get notified of new videos. The first book I want to share is How to Start Sewing by Assembly Books. Now, Assembly Books is a fashion company, so it's more of a collaboration type book. Now, while I actually purchased this book last December during Christmas, and I heard about it through the Fold line. I believe they had a video out in November or something of last year that discussed this book. And I was really excited and decided to grab it. So I'd already been sewing a good 5-6 years, but I was really interested in this book, how they described it on the Fold line. So as I got it, and I'll just give you some hints and stuff, this book is written like a textbook, but not one of those really dry textbooks. One of those textbooks that has examples in it and even has exercises at the end of each chapter. And I really like that because coming from an academic profession, it really gives you a lot of information about why you're doing something, the different tools that you need, and then again, it gives you sort of this practice exercise. A lot of times you'll read a book on sewing and it'll say, this is a basic stitch, and unless you have a pattern in mind or unless you're working on a project, you could go ahead and do a sample cut yourself, but you really have no direction to trying to do that activity. But this one really gives you a direction. It tells you how to start holding everything, what you should be looking for. If you are ever teaching a sewing course, I think this would be ideal book for you. Like I said, it's got the exercise in there. It's got a lot of details. It is very comprehensive into the amount of things that it has on here. It has everything from basic hand sewing to just the basic techniques with that, basics with pins and needles. Then it gets into your sewing machine, fabrics and patterns, visual, different sewing techniques, and so forth and so forth. And it's got like almost 50 chapters worth of content in here. And again, the illustrations are really well put together, and I think they just make this book a really asset in your sewing library, especially if you just find yourself in need of learning a specific technique. You can just go through the index and just find what you're looking for in here. So this is a really nice book. The next book that I want to share with you is the Colette Sewing Handbook, and this one is written by Sarah Mitiknik from Colette Patterns, and this particular sewing book comes with 5 project patterns, so that's a pretty nice little extra with the book. Now, this book, one of the reasons I like this book is that, as it's called, is a sewing handbook. So it's got a lot of information right up front at the very beginning regarding different sewing how-tos and techniques, especially if you're a beginner. Some things on basic sewing, some things on printing, on inserting a zipper, on ironing. And the other nice thing about this book is that all the steps are photographed. So while the first book, like I was saying, had some really good insight and it was very comprehensive, they are still illustrations. So sometimes an illustration can look a little weird, or you may not be just exactly sure what it is you're trying to see in the illustration, but photographs make that almost spot on and very clear. And that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to get this book. And I got this book several years ago when I was still starting to sew and still needing some instruction on certain things. The other thing that I really like about this book, if any of you have gone through like the Seam Work / Colette Patterns wardrobe workshop, is it talks about finding your wardrobe style and things. Well, there's a whole chapter inside this book about a thoughtful plan to your sewing. Not that I actually follow one, but it still really works really well. And not only does it talk about what you should be sewing, it talks about your shape and your size and things to consider when you're sewing and having a precise plan. It goes into talking about the pattern languages and everything. And then for each project in the book, it kind of builds on a new technique. So each time you learn a little bit something new. It even delves into getting the fit right and doing different types of fit alterations, from a bust adjustment to adjusting a muslin to get the fit right. The only thing I would say is that I wouldn't say the patterns in this are 100% beginner friendly. The very first pattern in this book is the meringue skirt. And here it is here. So it's kind of a simple skirt, but at the same time it has this scalloped hem, which I would say if you were a beginner, it could go very wrong, that scalloped hem, because you have to be really precise on the curves. You have to be really precise in your pressing and clipping of the curves. So I wouldn't say that some of the patterns in here are necessarily beginner friendly, but a lot of the instruction and the tips and techniques at the beginning of the book are really good for beginners. Now, my last book that I want to share with you, and hands down my favorite beginner book, is of course the Tilley Mullins Love It First Stitch book. And you can see I've got some wear on this book because I've used it so incredibly much. This book has 7 different projects within the book that you can actually make, and they come with the pattern, or in some cases they are so simple. Tilley explains how to make those, starting with the Bridget scarf. So basically, at the very first chapter, she goes over some basics of tools. She tells a little bit about her sewing journey. And then the very first thing is this very simple rectangular scarf. And it just gets you into sewing. It just dives you into it. And it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And through each chapter, as you are working on the project, each project sort of builds on each other, meaning that each project has another little technique that is new to you, which I find really good. And by the end of each chapter, even though you've learned a bunch of new techniques, you also have a new item that you have completed. And what's also really cool and really neat about this book is that there are basically hacks within it. So for each pattern, let's say here for the Mimi blouse, she provides you with examples about how to make it your own, how to hack it, add contrasting colors to it, for example. Or you could add different other elements. You know, maybe you want to add some covered buttons. So she has a whole little tutorial inside here on that. So even though there's 7 patterns in this book, you can mix and match those as far as the special hacks that are in the book. So the Megan dress, I think, has 3 different variations. The Mimi blouse has 2. The Dolphine skirt has a couple of different variations. So you're actually getting a lot more patterns for your money with this, and you're learning a whole lot of different techniques and experiencing how to hack a pattern, because she kind of takes you step by step through that process about how to add and enhance the elements of the patterns in the book. So the only thing that I would say about this particular book is that some people are not into the style of clothes that Tilley makes. And I will say they're very much on the sort of fresh, 1960s mod style of clothes, which personally I'm in love with and I think are amazing, and I pretty much love all Tilley and the Buttons patterns, but this is hands down the best book that I've found for beginning sewing, because as you go through the book you have a finished product and you've learned a bunch of skills as well. So this is the one that I would recommend if you're getting into sewing to make clothes. Those are my top 3 beginner sewing book recommendations, and I'm going to sneak in sort of an extra one in here, which is for if you already know how to sew but you want to get started sewing with stretch fabric. And of course, once again, it's a Tilley Whalen's book, and this is the book Stretch, which is her latest book she released last December, I think, last winter, or early winter this year. But this book is just like the first book. It has projects every chapter. It takes you step by step. She's got hacks in there to kind of make it your own, but she goes through the process of how to use stretch fabric, all types of different knits, and what you should be checking for, and how to work with them, and how to set up your sewing machine with them. So this book, if you're already a beginner sewer but you want to go into sewing with knits, I would definitely recommend getting this book as well. So like I said, those are my top beginner-friendly sewing books. I hope you found that helpful, and I'd love to hear in the comments below if you know of any sewing books that would be really great for beginner sewers. I'm always trying to share this information with viewers and friends who want to get into sewing, and personally, I actually like reading beginner sewing books because they just kind of always explain things a little bit more in detail than advanced sewing books, and I'm always finding that I learn something every time I read one of those books, regardless how long I've been sewing. So like I said, if you have any recommendations, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Kick off National Sewing Month, or September, until I got this books. Am I correct in saying that? Despite having already, let me do this again.